What's good, y'all, man? Hope y'all are doing well today. So in this video, I'm going to show y'all how to make beats similar to DJ Khaled's new project, specifically like the darker and up-tempo beats that were used by Lil Durk, 21 Savage, Baby, and Future. Per usual, I made this beat from scratch, and I'm going to show y'all my whole process of making the beat. And with all that being said, let's just hop right into the sample. Alright, so starting off, the first thing that I want to talk about is the tempo. I chose a tempo of 153 beats per minute for the sample, and for these types of beats, I'd say you probably want to be between like 145 and 170. Alright, so for my first melody sound, I went to Analog Lab, and I went to the Analog Elements preset bank, and I got the Light and Darkness pad preset. And so for my first pattern, I put in this pretty repetitive and simple MIDI. So for the most part, all it really is just utilizing these middle three notes here. The key that this sample is in is an F minor, and I started off by placing the root note, but I actually wanted to start with a fifth note in the scale, so I put that down, which is 5 half steps below, and then I just built this up back to the octave of that first note down here, which is C. Just use those same notes again to fill out the rest of the measure, and then I copied that over for the second measure and just changed the first note from a low C to a higher A sharp, which is the fourth note in the scale, just to add a little variation to it. And then I just took these first two measures and copied it out for the full 8 measure loop. So adding that to a mixer track, I put a few effects on it. The first being this RC20 with this Producer Grind Experiment Club preset. And then I opened up another RC20 and put on the Sad Piano preset and turned off the noise. And then I put on this EQ to cut out the lows and some of the harshness in the mids. And lastly, I just put on a limiter and turned the gain up just to make it louder so I could hear it better in the mix. And then after that, I opened up another Analog Lab, and I went to this bank, also by Prod by Hayes, and I got the Coder synth preset. And I just copied and pasted the MIDI from the previous pattern into this one. So for effects on that, I put on some halftime on the default preset, and then I put on some portal on the Twisted Circles preset from the Grain Synthesis bank, and then I rendered both of those out as audio clips and I put them into the playlist. And I just used the second half of the 8-bar loop for the second synth pattern because I only wanted it where the portal was engaged. So after putting in my first two synth patterns, I went into X-Band and I put in the big section brass preset. And with this, I just put in these low notes. And with this one, I just wanted to put in some low notes just to make the sample sound a little more full and kind of give it more of a darker sound. So I rendered it out as an audio clip, and after I'd rendered it out, I didn't want it to decay for the full 4 bars on each of them. So what I ended up doing is I went to the top left of the audio clip and then hit automate and then volume, and I came up with this one automation clip and just copied it over, and it just stops after 3 measures instead of decaying for the full 4. So it slowly and gradually gets quieter instead of just cutting off. And so for my last melody pattern, I opened up Purity and I got the synth flute preset from the lead synth section, and I put in this pretty straightforward lead pattern. And I ended up making each of these notes decay a little longer just so that they slide into each other and it sounds better. And I also turned up the attack a little bit in the VST so that it sounds smoother. And I routed that to a mixer track and put one effect on it, which was Portal on the Grain Swells preset. And then I just adjusted the dry wet slider here. And once I did that, I rendered that out as an audio clip and I put that back into the arrangement. And then I routed these to a mixer track where I rendered these out as audio clips. So then I put all those audio clips into the new arrangement and I color coded them. And then I went into each of them and I changed the mode to stretch and I pitched it up by 100 cents. So the final sample is rendered out in F sharp minor. And then how I got the fifth stem is I just took this first melody and I cloned the audio clip, and I just went in and I pitched it down by 1 octave, and then I routed each of these to mixer tracks, and I put a couple of EQs on the top 2 melodies. So for the first melody, I put in this one to cut out some of the harshness and cut out more lows, and then on the octave down melody, I put on another EQ, again just to cut out some of the harsh points in it, and then I arranged all these stems and rendered out the final loop. So once I had my final loop, I imported it into a new project file, and this is where I added the drums and did the final render for the beat. So when I first opened the project, I set the tempo to 153, which was the same as the sample, and then I pitched it down by 200 cents and then set the mode to stretch. So the key of the drums in the final beat is in E minor, and then I upped the tempo to 157 beats per minute. So hopping into the drum sounds, for my first 2 sounds, I layered them together. So the first sound is a clap, and then I layered that with the snare sound. And for these, I placed them on every 3rd beat of the measure, except for the 4th and 8th measures, where I placed them on the and of 1, and also pitched the snare up to D because it sounded like it harmonized with the clap a little better up here. And then after putting in my clap and snare, I added my hi-hat sound. So for the most part, this hi-hat is pretty much just a 2-step with some rolls added. And I believe all the rolls that I used were using the 1/3 step snap to grid. I just put them in where I thought they sounded good. I was trying to make this a little complicated just so I can kind of establish the bounce for the rest of the drums. And then for the end here, what I ended up doing is I went into the 1/6 beat snap to grid, and I put in this descend, and by itself it sounds a little out of place, but it will make more sense in context with some of the later drum sounds. Next, I put in my second snare, and this one is just meant to accent with the original clap snare combo that I put in. And then after putting in that first snare pattern, I put in my open hat. And then next, I added this snare, and I put this snare roll in at the end of an 8-bar pattern, so it provides a buildup for a transition into either the verse or the hook. And this goes hand in hand with that weird like hi-hat roll that I had at the end of the pattern. Similar to the hi-hat, I used the 1/3 step snap to grid. So now going into the 808 patterns, I have a couple of them. The first one corresponds with that snare roll that I just showed y'all, and then the second one is like a simpler one that I used during the verse. So both the 808s use the same boosted spins type of sound. So both of these follow the root note, which is E, and then there's this roll right here, which just by looking at it, it looks pretty similar to the snare roll. All I pretty much did is I just copied the snare roll into this MIDI, and I just went in and adjusted some of the notes accordingly, and also shifted the velocities. And the end of that 808 pattern transitions into the second 808 pattern. So that's going to wrap it up for this one. I hope y'all enjoyed the video and found it pretty helpful. Let me know what you'd like to see me do next and any of the feedback you have for me in the comments. And I hope y'all have a great rest of your day. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.
Roll up, Tess.